Welcome to the Choose to Be podcast. Thanks for joining us, everyone. Happy holidays. Hopefully, you are finding some peace in the holidays this season. We are so excited to have joining with us one of our amazing coaches, Kim Brown. Kim, thank you for being here. Really quickly, Kim, I'm going to just intro you for just a second. Kim is one of our certified betrayal trauma coaches. She is a certified grief educator. She is an APSATS candidate, and she really does an amazing she does amazing work with clients around grief. Kim, you've experienced your own grief and not only have that training, but have the personal experience, which goes so far, right? There's so much training that an education that you can get that unless you have been through it, walked through it, they're just pieces that I find don't really have a language to. It's just that look, that sense of knowing of just, "Yep, I get it." And I know that that means a lot to clients when they can work with someone who understands and gets it outside of that psychoeducational piece. So I love your work. I love listening to you, and I'm just so grateful. We're both so grateful that you're here to join us today. So thank you.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm so happy to be there and for saying that. It's so true too, right? And it applies to the trauma work that we do too from our personal experience. There goes a deeper understanding and almost an unsaid, I get this place of being, right? And grief has taken up as much of my life as betrayal has. And so it made sense for me to pursue and study and understand both of those things that had occupied so much of my life and my time.
Kim, are you open to sharing just a little bit of what you just said right there, how your experience with grief in different
Yeah,
areas of your life.
yeah, totally. There's a lot of different types of grief, and as I got into the training and certification for grief, I loved being able to put names to it, right? Like when language is important, and sometimes just identifying what something was can doesn't take away, but the understanding brings a different level, and sometimes it helps you bring the right tools into what's going on for you. I did my training under David Kessler. David Kessler co-authored books with Elizabeth Kubler-Ross and adapted those stages of grief for the bereaved, which were originally meant for the dying. That was originally who they were researched and meant for. So when I started that training with him, he was listing all these different types of grief and accumulative grief and collective grief and anticipatory. And I realized that I had lived in either grief or anticipatory grief for about 20 years, a little over 20 years, as my family of origin, my closest circle, one by one was diagnosed, almost everyone but me at one time. So for about 20 some odd years, every single member of my family was battling and then sometimes battling again. And then sometimes their spouse was battling. And sometimes it was my niece. And then it was two of my best friends. So I was at a bedside of someone in my most inner circle for 20 some odd years. I lost two sisters, a mom and a dad, and a best friend. And I could extend that circle, right? Because before this time, I would have said the losses of all four of my grandparents at quite a young age who were influential in my life rocked my world until I moved to all of my people, right? And it just gets closer and closer and closer. And one of those deaths of my sisters was from addiction and an overdose. So that would have been more of a traumatic, right? As far as different from the ones that we were diagnosed with and anticipating and fighting and things like that. So all of those losses have just stacked up. And what we know is grief opens the door to past grief. Trauma opens the door to past trauma. Right. And so all of one would happen and all the rest would come through the door. And so yeah, that's where I've lived. My mom passed away was the last passing. And so that is the freshest, but all of those have built over this time. And that's a little bit of my grief story. And I can go into any more of those individual experiences, but I have learned how to live in grief and eventually integrate my grief into my life, which is the goal. The goal isn't to get rid of grief because the grief doesn't need to be fixed or changed or overcome. And it's not a place where we get to where we're not going to feel that grief again, because grief is tied to the love that we've experienced, or grief is tied to anything that we cared about or felt like was important and lost. And so if that is still important to us, if we still care about it and it's still gone, then grief will always exist there. Right. And so it's not more about how it's the grief controlling us as much as just integrated into our life. And it's okay.
How would you explain that to a betrayed partner who is feeling just so racked with grief and struggling to function? And then she hears that's supposed to be integrated into my life. I can
Ah,
imagine a couple of my clients going like, "What the hell?" Like, I will not integrate in this my life. I have to move past this.
yes. Yes. And we should start with integration is the goal after you've been where you have been. And integration does sound ridiculous when you are in the pure overwhelm state. So when we're talking to someone who is early betrayal trauma, early grief, then we talk about just allowing, just feeling, just surviving, that you don't have to do anything, right? And I know you want to, because I know you want to do anything to get rid of the pain. So I know we're always trying to figure out, well, then what am I supposed to do? So the answer you don't want to hear is feel it, nothing, allow it, accept it, honor it, tend to it. That is the way through. And is my coach. My coach always says, here's a life hack. The quickest way to feel better is to feel bad. Right. And I'm like, well, that sucks. I hate that. I hate that. So, right. And so it is the feeling. Right. And so when someone is like, how the heck am I supposed to do that? This is what's going on for me. And then we just move to that place and say, okay, then that's what's going on for you. And that's what's coming up. And how do we lean in and actually sit with this? Like if grief was something that we were going to honor, how how do you lean into it and how do you take care of that?
Which I think probably leads really well into the 6, is it domains or the 6?
Just six general needs that grief needs, right? That
Mhm.
grief asks for. And the first is just a witness, just to be witnessed. And that goes back to what I'm saying is without fixing, without changing, that no one's trying to tell you how to feel better, that no one's trying to tell you why this is okay. But in in the bereavement side, if you lose someone, there's all these things that people say, and anything that dismisses or takes away the pain that you might be feeling. Now, you can always follow someone's lead. And if they're like, I'm really grateful, um, I had this person in my life, then you can always follow that lead and go, I'm so glad for that for you, right? But anytime someone is expressing pain or just exhibiting pain, and then someone else tries to take away pain that says something like, it just bypasses or dismisses, where it's, you know, that there's a higher plan for all of this, or you know that they're in a better place, or um, you should be feeling grateful for the time that you had, or at least you're able to have other children, anything like that. Um, Dismisses and bypasses that pain. So when we're talking in with betrayal, same thing. That pain just needs a place to be witnessed. Their story needs a place to be heard without bypassing, without dismissing, without the pep talk. And sometimes groups are support, any kind of support, coaches, therapists, groups are fabulous for this because groups are set up for the majority, that we ask people not to necessarily, we ask them to share and give their understanding, their experiences, but we usually ask not to advise or tell people what to do. And so that's a fabulous place for you to start to express your story.
It makes me think about, and I appreciate that you talked about like therapists, coaches, groups, and even if there are any spouses listening to this on how to show up and support your betrayed wife or husband through this, is doing that, being a witness to that grief without minimizing, rationalizing, just without doing anything to take that away or trying to move them through it, trying to help or fix or explain, and just simply letting them feel whatever they need to feel. So, if we have any spouses who are listening, rewind and go listen to that again, because Kim, you just put that so beautifully on how they can sit with you and how we can sit with others in their grief as well.
Yeah. And sit with yourself,
Mhm.
right? Like when you know this isn't something that I am supposed to get rid of right away. This is something that is just here and it makes sense why it's here. And of course it's here. And then and you and then you can be with yourself. And I love that you said that about the spouse, and that's difficult. I want to give some grace there too, because that's going to tap into their own pain, their own shame, to see someone they love in pain. And honestly, that's why all of us say the things that we do to someone in pain. Is why we would like to see them not be in pain. Right.
Mhm.
And so it usually comes from that kind of good place where we're like, well, maybe this will help, this will comfort, right? And so the hardest thing to do is allow the pain, right? And it's actually one of the highest forms of love that we can give, is to allow someone else to feel it.
Well, it's total acceptance of their authenticity.
Yeah.
So, yeah, makes sense.
Yeah. And the second need goes right along with that, like not only to be witnessed, but to learn how to express those feelings. So we talked about that a little bit, right? And I really want to highlight the word feelings, because many people say their story over and over and over again, but they're here, and I'm tapping my head. They're they're up here in their head, and they're talking their story. And so they feel like they've expressed their story over and over again. And I'm talking about feeling in your body, feeling, and then being able to share those feelings from that feeling standpoint. And when you feel the difference, you know that there's a significant difference between talking your feelings and feeling your feelings and expressing those feelings to a safe person.
Yep, absolutely. Well, I'm big on that whole feel your feelings. That's key. Just those two, I know you're going to go to the third, but just those two alone take time to practice. So, like you were saying earlier, this isn't something that is a checklist that you can push through or power through, hustle through, righteous through. This is definitely why this ends up becoming an integrated part of your life. That'll make
I
sense.
I I love the word practice. I use it often, and I have come to believe that nothing important in life is ever mastered. I've never met anyone who has mastered anything, and anything important for me will always be a continual practice, even if I think that I have gotten really good at it. And I have learned it. And I have done it. I've done the heck out of it. Right. And then no, I've got to practice that again. We've got to keep practicing that over and over and over. All these are tools, and tools don't matter at all unless you use them and you use them appropriately. I have a therapist that has meant a great deal for me in my personal journey who talks about tools in a way that's like, listen, a hammer is a tool, but a hammer can be in your shed and you never look at it, right? It's, you own it, you have it, you know exactly how you're supposed to use it, but you don't. And a hammer used appropriately can build a home. A hammer used in a morbid way can murder. So, like, sometimes we take our tools and we set them aside and never use them. Sometimes we use them and we build something for ourselves. And sometimes we use them to beat ourselves up or beat someone else up, right? So it matters how these tools are used, and they are just tools.
Yeah.
They are just like originally pieces of grief were tried to be understood. And we all know the stages of grief with the denial and the anger, all of the stages, and we reference them, and sometimes in a way that shows our misconceptions to them, because all they were meant to do were show people and have people be able to relate to what might be happening for them, and have them be able to name something that might be going on for them because they were happening for so many people. And it wasn't meant to say, this is how you do it. This is what you'll feel. This will be a checklist. It will just be, listen, these things are showing up for the majority of people. So if it helps you to know that, to plan on it, to expect it, or to be able to name it and to understand it, then here you go. Here's a tool.
Would you mind we've done 2, would you mind going through all 6 and then come back to 3 and talk a little bit more about that? I'm worried we're not gonna get through all of them, but
Yes,
just sometimes our listeners like to hear them all like boom, 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 boom too. So
totally.
what are the 6?
Totally. So the third one is a release of the burden of guilt. There's always some form of guilt or personalization that we've taken on. And in betrayal trauma, it is very prevalent for women to go to the place of, what did I do wrong? What could have I done? And those type of things, and spend a lot of time in guilt. The fourth one is working on old wounds that might have come through the door with this trauma. Um, the fifth one is talking about integration of the pain and the love, and acknowledging that that can exist for you for possibly long periods of times. And the sixth one is not just one acceptance, but a million acceptances over and over and over. And it's not an end game, but it's also this place of acceptance can open you up for deeper meaning. It's not to say, because this can trigger a lot of people, like, you make meaning out of your pain. But it's this place where, after all of this work and all of this integration and all of this place that and acceptance, that you naturally continue to move forward, that meaning starts to open up for you in some of those deeper ways.
Yeah, I love that. Going back to 3 on guilt, I see that so often. It carries through even if the relationship doesn't work out and they end up divorcing. kind of piles on because now we've got kids, guilt for kids and their experience attached to that as well in a deeper level. Releasing that burden of guilt again takes time. It takes a lot of time. And I don't know, maybe some of you have figured it out, but I don't know how you would do that without professional support because of what comes after that. Number 4, working on old wounds. I think that that ties in too. I've seen that tie in where the guilt isn't just around the betrayal and even divorce. Guilt is also carrying past wounds as well. So I feel like those 2 make sense why they're back to back because I think they go together. Having someone be able to support you and help you in pulling out that past information that's making the guilt feel so intense can also be really helpful as well. Makes sense to me.
Occasionally, I'll have partners who don't want to look at anything that might have come through the door because that triggers guilt of maybe somehow my response is my fault, or they don't want to look at it because they only want their spouse who hurt them to be the problem. And you're not the problem for having past things come through your door. Nobody's the problem for that. But that acceptance of what is really important. But I will have clients from time to time really fight that.
Yeah.
And it's because I didn't choose for my spouse to do these things to me, and I didn't choose for this door to be open. So for a lot of them, it's like, I thought I closed that door.
Yeah.
Like, why in the world is this coming up? I'm not ready. I don't want to, or I already did.
Yeah. So true.
Absolutely agree with all of that. To what you said first, Amy, I actually share that belief. There might be people who are out there healing on their own. I guess that's possible. For me, that would be the absolute anomaly. The people that I have seen do the most good work and healing. And for me, in my own experience, I could not have done anything on my own. And actually I tried for a little bit. And I would still go to groups, um, but I was isolating to a degree. And I think that's normal too. But you start to realize that healing generally needs to happen in the presence of an other. And that can be a safe friend. That doesn't always have to be what we're talking about, but it's where I find my most helpful support in coaching and therapy and groups and things like that. So that's why we repeat those.
Yeah.
But you almost have to be witnessed by a safe other
Mm.
in someone that can hold you and someone that can guide you
Well, it
and someone
activates
who
that
is there.
vulnerability. Right? It
Yeah.
activates the vulnerability that I think's been taken away because of betrayal, because of I'm gonna use Hope Ray's term, because of betrayal violence, because you've been adapting and bonding to someone in a false reality, someone who isn't being true and vulnerable and authentic. And so the healing journey and the grieving, all of it's this opportunity to come back to that vulnerability, to come back to that authentic you who feels deeply, and it's beautiful, it's not wrong. Like in my support groups, when these women show up and they are raw and vulnerable and it's being witnessed and they're feeling safe to share those beautiful feelings, they are tapping into something that they didn't have in their relationships. They didn't get that opportunity. It wasn't safe to do so. So they might not see it or want to see it, but what I'm witnessing is you are now experiencing healthy. It feels painful. It feels awful, but you are experiencing what healthy, authentic vulnerability, real humanness is. And I think that's hard to conceptualize when that that hasn't been safe or allowed in many marriages.
I think so too. I think people who the first time they start to experience vulnerability and intimacy even
Yeah.
are like, this hurts.
Something's wrong.
You're right.
Something's very
That's
wrong.
exactly right. It hurts. And it
Yeah.
does, right? But it's the opportunity to be experienced differently. Experience maybe even being you or even going back and experiencing things in a different way, being in a presence of someone who go, oh, I am okay.
Mhm.
I am okay.
I think it's experiencing holistically. I really do. It's what we all have to practice and learn. This doesn't come naturally. Someone doesn't just come with all these tools and skills and naturally has it. Every single human has to learn these tools and skills and practice. And generations who have a lot of that generational trauma, it's my one of my favorite quotes by Terry Real, who talks about it takes that one person to walk through the flames of the fire to break that generational trauma, and they're doing that work not only from themselves, but those that came before them and those that come after. I think it's a brave, courageous road and journey that a lot of the women that I work with didn't choose, but they are now choosing to continue to walk through that fire bravely, and it's the most, oh my gosh, not even know the right word, just empowering, beautiful, humbling thing that I'm able to witness as a professional helping them.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So let me ask you, Kim, for our listeners, if you would hope that they could take away one message from today around grief, around their own healing, what would you hope that they would take away?
Actually, I think I would want them to know they're they're okay. I have a lot of emotion welling up as I say that, right? Because you feel broken. You feel like you're drowning and you feel like there's no hope. There's no other. Uh, I think I want them to just know it's okay. It's normal. They're not alone. There's help. That's
And
simple.
for those listening, I don't know. Well, I'm going to assume that you can feel Kim's energy, but those who work with you just feel this embracing of your love and your energy. And you bring this calm that when you bring that calm with all of your knowledge, it also, their nervous system can attune with yours and you calm people around you. I believe it is one of your special gifts. And I appreciate you sharing that with our listeners today. I appreciate you sharing pieces of yourself. I think it's really beautiful how you've taken all of this heart in your life and you have actively chosen to do something with it. And now, where you are training and teaching and healing and walking with these individuals, I think it's just beautiful. So, thank you.
Thank you so much for saying it means a lot to me, Alana. Appreciate that so much.
Thank you.
Well, thank you for giving of your time. And for all of our listeners hanging out with us today, thank you for being with us. And we look forward to seeing you all next week.
You don't have to navigate recovery or healing alone. As you heard us talk about today with Kim, it's the first step to giving grief what it needs, and that's to be witnessed. Come have that witnessed by those who get it, those who understand, and can hold sacred space for your grief. Choose Recovery support groups are here to provide just that for you. Join today by heading over to chooserecoveryservices.com and begin choosing to heal, choosing recovery, and choosing you. Take care, everybody.